quick look at the agenda. We'll start with 2 presentations and then take a short break here. And then we'll have 3 more presentations. And for us here on site, we'll go away for lunch at the restaurant Inspira, which is nearby. And then that will be followed by an open discussion. And if you listen in online, you can write questions in the Q&A function during the whole seminar, and we'll raise them after each presentation if we have time, or save them for the open discussion. And you who are in the room here today, you can raise your hand either after each presentation or during the open discussion. And I also want to mention that this session is being recorded, and yes, and also if you can't find the Q&A function, you can see it here in the little picture. Yes. Everyone can still hear me fine, I hope. Okay, short about CV Swedish Waterhouse. It started as a platform in 2003 and is housed at Stockholm International Water Institute, which has its headquarters in Stockholm. And we bring together actors from science, policy, and practice in the Swedish and international arena for equitable and sustainable water management. And our goal is to support collective action for sustainable freshwater governance and management. And we arrange seminars, generate knowledge products, provide advice, facilitate roundtables, workshops, and multi-stakeholder groups on different topics where actors from the same sector or with a shared interest come together to co-create new solutions and policy recommendations. And one of these groups, the one currently active, is the group on groundwater, and more about that in a few seconds. And if you want to learn more about our projects and get invites to events, you can register to our newsletter. So the multi-stakeholder group on groundwater, it was launched on World Water Day 2022, which was a year with much focus on groundwater, as the UN water theme for the year was to make our often invisible groundwater visible, and to show how essential it is for both humans and nature. And the overall aim is to gather Swedish stakeholders in groundwater issues, enhance collective learning, investigate solutions in groundwater governance, and raise awareness and knowledge about groundwater. And the focus has primarily been self-sufficiency, sustainability, and resilience in a Swedish context, but with connections to international research and examples. And the group has a wide range of Swedish participants, around 50, from different organizations in the public and private sector, academia, and NGOs. And the group has arranged open seminars, such as this one, and launched a policy brief on groundwater conditions in Sweden. And the group currently works with a project to enhance communication and knowledge on the importance of accounting for groundwater in municipal decision-making processes in Sweden. And it is currently I and my colleague Alice at CV who facilitate this group. And I'll put the links for both the policy brief and the newsletter in the chat soon. And our speakers of today, we have Torleif Dahlin, who is professor here in Lund, Fredrike Storm Hansen, who is project coordinator at the Danish Ministry of Environment, Espen Auken, adjunct professor at Århus Geoinstruments, and Peter Dahlqvist, senior geologist at Geological Survey of Sweden, and Tina Martin, who is researcher here in Lund. And with that, I'll hand over to Torleif, who will give the first presentation and moderate the rest of the seminar. Thank you.
I'll try this one. Do you hear us, Espen? Do you hear me?
Yes,
Yep.
I hear you.
Okay, excellent. Thanks. Yeah, I will talk about the invisible water, why we need better knowledge about the groundwater. And the photo here sort of illustrates that this is a so-called sand river in Zimbabwe, which is dry most of the year on the surface, but about a meter down, there is abundant water all year round. So, well, what's groundwater? Is it important? Where is it? How about recharge, quality? And I will also go into how about groundwater in the other parts of the world and if we need to bother about that. Groundwater is stands for 99% of all fresh water in fluid form in the world, and most of the surface water comes from groundwater, and groundwater is depleted or contaminated in many areas. So this is really important, and it is something that we need to bother about. So groundwater is defined as, you probably all know, the water in the saturated zone below the ground, and it interacts with water in the atmosphere and surface water through processes of infiltration, percolation, and so on. And then we have outflow of groundwaters into springs, rivers, lakes, the sea, etc. And the exchange of between surface and groundwater can then take place in streams and other water bodies, and either the groundwater feeds the stream or it drains, and it can vary between different parts of the year. What is the case? This is typical sort of sketch landscape in Sweden with typical groundwater conditions here, where we have a lot of it's very much formed by the glacial processes here with eskers and sand layers, etc., that can be aquifer materials. I don't know if you see my pointer, an esker here, fractures in the bedrock, sand layers, and you may have here at the transition between soil and rock also water-bearing layers that can be tapped. Then, of course, we also have sedimentary aquifers, especially here in Skåne. But we are traditionally believed to have abundant water resources of good quality here, but is it true? Well, about half our surface water supply comes from surface water and half comes from groundwater. And the groundwater, it consists of roughly half is managed aquifer recharge. So you take surface water and infiltrate to form groundwater. There are a number of concerns about surface water. It requires more advanced cleaning, and we've had incidents that have been quite serious with cryptosporidium and other parasites, algae bloom, bacteria, or other problems that you can have. Chemical contamination, of course, and then browning of water is an issue which has become more and more widespread in later years. Groundwater cleaning is generally simpler, and in some cases no cleaning is needed, but key concerns here are climate change, environmental change, increased demand could also be a concern, and then contamination from nitrate, pesticides, PFAS, road salt, etc. And the PFAS has been really up in court cases and in the media lately. Then maybe we need to consider other threats today also, terrorist actions, armed conflicts, etc. But what factors do we have that affect the groundwater recharge? Well, we have the climate change, change in precipitation, evaporation, etc. But very important is, which has been ongoing for at least the last decade, is the increased amount of paved surfaces, roads, parking spaces, buildings, etc., that prevent water from infiltrating. We have ditching and drainage, straightening of channeled water courses, reduced wetlands, which all contribute to reducing the amount of available water. As you notice, some of my slides have Swedish text in the figures. I hope you can cope with that. And other threats against the groundwater quality are many. So we can have leakage water from landfills. Illustrated here, we can have fertilizers and pesticides from the agriculture. We can have industrial spills with DNAPLs or PFAS, etc. And all these can infiltrate into the groundwater and travel with the groundwater. And in order to prevent this, we need knowledge, of course, about where the pollutant sources are, but also we need to know something about the groundwater, if there are any natural protective layers in the ground, etc. And then lowering of the groundwater level can also lead to oxidation and dissolution of naturally occurring substances in the ground, for example, sulfur, arsenic, etc. So, and this can of course increase if we have climate change and decreasing groundwater levels during the dry part of the year, and then when the groundwater levels recover. And the groundwater moves slowly but fast enough so that contaminant can spread over large areas during decades. So in sand and gravel can be maybe typically 0.1 to 1 meter per day, or in fractured rock it can be 1 to 10 meters per day even. Another reason for needing information about groundwater is that in construction projects, groundwater is almost always a key concern, because when you start to build something, you usually have to excavate and for the foundation, and then the inflow can affect the stability of this excavation. Lowering because of an excavation or a tunnel can cause subsidence in buildings and other infrastructure. And lowering on the groundwater can also, of course, negatively affect groundwater sources, springs and ecosystems. And increased gradients can lead to transport of pollutants in urban areas. We often have old industrial sites with contaminants that can then be transported into the construction area or neighboring areas. And again, lowering can lead to oxidation of pollutants and naturally occurring substances that can later be transported with the groundwater. So good knowledge about groundwater is a key factor for sustainable construction. I wanted to show an example here from southern Sweden. This is the Kristianstad Plain, which is Sweden's largest groundwater resource. And now this is again in Swedish here, but the main aquifer are these sedimentary sand formations here. And of course, it's really important not to spill anything on the ground here that can infiltrate and percolate in and contaminate this really important aquifer, which is used for water supply for the people living in there, and also for food industry and so on. And how can we protect this from risk for contamination from a new motorway that is going to be built here. In this case, the technique that was used was to use electrical resistivity tomography, which is carried out by transmitting controlled currents into the ground and doing many different combinations of these. And two parallel lines were measured, one along each center of the motorway, and then there were a number of perpendicular cross sections. This was used for designing a drilling, sampling, and hydraulic testing program. So they did slug test and things like that. And all this was then used for, and you can see here that we have long sections here of low resistive material, which indicates that there's a lot of clay in the ground. Whereas in some areas, like here, in the end, you see the very similar results in the parallel sections. And here there is less of this low resistive material. And this was all used together with available geological information from the drilling and slug tests, etc., to generate a conceptual groundwater model. And thanks to the continuous information here, it was concluded that most of this road stretch was well protected by natural layers, but in the ends, where is my pointer? Yeah, in either end of this section, it was necessary to construct impervious ditches to prevent spills from the road, from road salts, and if there was an accident with petrol or chemical spills, to enter into the aquifer. And thanks to this information, the road administration could save around 50 million Swedish kronor, or in that time it was 5 million euros about. Now, of course, we're not so happy with the exchange rate any longer, so it would not be the same ratio now, really, but that's one example. Then I also wanted to look at the international situation. And globalization drives virtual water flow and unsustainable water use. So about 40% of Europe's water consumption is located in other parts of the world. And this is through import of food and other goods. So, for example, 1 kilo potatoes takes about 250 liters to produce. 1 kilo of rice, 3.4 thousand liters, and then animal products take a lot more. So 1 kilo of beef meat requires about 15,000 liters to produce, according to this source. I've seen other sources that say that it's a lot more, but it depends on, I guess, how you raise the cattle, etc. And also cotton takes a lot of water to produce. And here in Sweden, half of our food is actually imported, and export of farm products has led to large economic development in parts of the world, but at the expense of unsustainable groundwater depletion. So that's a publication about the situation in Peru here, but these are tomatoes that we can find in the supermarket here that are from Morocco, and Morocco is not known for having abundant water, I think. So about 40% of the global agriculture is irrigated, and 70% of the irrigation water comes from groundwater. And more than 70% of the pumped groundwater goes to irrigation. And during long periods of drought, most of, or almost all, food comes from groundwater. could also be said that the green revolution in agriculture was a very bad revolution for groundwater. It has led to a lot of contamination of nitrate and pesticides, and also excessive groundwater withdrawal. And the worst in the world is considered to be India, actually. And this satellite map here shows the declining in groundwater levels on a yearly basis, so more than 2 centimeters per year on average. And it also leads to, the irrigation leads to salinization of soils, and yeah, unproductive land. About 40% of all extracted groundwaters comes from large aquifers, and 1/3 of these are depleted beyond recovery within a human perspective. It's also known now that about 25% of the mean sea level rise is due to excessive groundwater extraction that drains out to the oceans. And combined with subsidence due to groundwater pumping in the cities, this is a bad mix. One example of a huge aquifer which is overexploited is the Ogallala aquifer in United States, where large areas, these red areas on the map on the left here, have been the drawdown is more than 50 meters. in large areas here, and so they have to drill deeper and deeper wells to get groundwater, and of course at some point this comes to an end. And also California is well known for excessive groundwater withdrawal, and this is a satellite image that shows the decline in groundwater as inferred from gravimetric measurements. It created subsidence of the ground surface of more than up to 60 centimeters per year. So I think this sums up to that we need to realize that the global food availability can be expected to decrease and prices to rise. And this will also require us to be more self-reliant on food in the future. So there will be more demand for productive farming land and irrigation water here in this part of the world to balance this over exploitation that will come to an end at some point. So to sum up here, motivation for mapping groundwater for long-term sustainable management of the groundwater. We need that because of the climate change, the change in recharge that has taken place, the contamination hazards, also growing populations, and increased need for food production in the future. And in order to manage the groundwater, we use groundwater models, both conceptual and numerical models, but these are mostly based on very sparse actual data. So a limited number of scattered drillings and qualified guesswork in between, you might say. But it's also needed for sustainable construction. I have gathered some suggestions for reading about groundwater. I will not go through it now, but we will share the presentations afterward. I could point you to this new textbook about groundwater in Swedish that we have written here in Sweden. It is now being translated to English. And then I would like to thank you for your attention with this picture that shows the groundwater. This is a groundwater spring in Mozambique where you can actually see the water flowing out. Thanks for your attention. Yeah, any questions? Okay, so then Fredrike.
Can you hear me? And the people online, can you hear me as well? Are they muted? Okay, they can hear me. Okay, perfect. Hello, everyone. I don't know whether it's morning or afternoon anymore. It's still morning, I guess. My name is Fredrika Hansen. I work with the Danish Environmental Protection Agency, which is a part of the Ministry of Environment in Denmark. I graduated in 2021 from TU Delft with an education in applied geophysics and have been working at the EPA for approximately 2 years. So today I'll be telling you something about how we manage groundwater mapping in Denmark. So Denmark is a relatively small country, at least in comparison to Sweden. We have a population of about 6 billion people, and we get all of our water supply from the groundwater. Some places you'll see that it's almost 100% that we get from the groundwater. That's technically true. I think there's a couple small islands that still use surface water, but as a whole, we use 100% of our water supply from the groundwater. And this is financed through water taxes. It's completely consumer financed, both the managing and the treatment of the water as well. We've elected to have a very simple treatment of our groundwater. So when we pump it up, we actually only do a simple filtration of it. We don't do any chemical treatment or anything. And that also means that it's very important for us to protect our groundwater resources unless we want to start doing these chemical treatments in the future. With regards to responsibility, there are three main components of the Danish legislative system. I'm with the state, so we focus on legislation, orders, approval of pesticides, groundwater mapping, including vulnerability mapping, and monitoring. Then we have the regional governments. They're actually responsible for mapping and monitoring of soil pollution, as well as cleaning the soil pollution up, and also for permits of extraction of raw materials. Finally, there's the municipalities. They are responsible for the water supply, the licenses to extract groundwater, and wastewater treatment as well. They are also responsible for the actual protection of the groundwater with the information that we give them from the state side. A brief history of the groundwater management in Denmark, you can actually pull it all the way back to 1853 when we had a big cholera epidemic in Copenhagen. It killed 4,800 people, which today doesn't sound like a lot, but back then it was really a large part of the population. And at that point, people got really focused on the sanitary issues that were a problem with surface water. So slowly we began to have these decisions to focus more on using groundwater and protecting the groundwater in a much more sustainable way. Since then, there have been a number of Protection Act strategies that we've implemented to support the protection of groundwater as well. But it was in the 1990s that we actually decided that we need to map the groundwater as well. We need to find out where it is so we can focus our protection more specifically. And there were a couple of different acts as well to support this, which takes us slowly forward to 2015, where we've actually mapped, we kind of finished the whole groundwater mapping project in Denmark, and it was decided that this should continue to an operational maintenance task, which means that the municipalities tell us when they're changing something in their extraction systems, or when there's an industry that wants to extract more water somewhere or change the place that they're extracting water, and then we find out whether there's something that should be changed in the zonation as well to have different protection zones, or whether there's been a change, or even just more data, better data that means that we can update our groundwater models and geological models. Some of the key water policies that we have in Denmark are nitrate and phosphate regulations, pesticide removal, well protection zones, which actually means that around the abstraction place, we have a closer zone where you're not allowed to use any kind of pesticide or any kind of fertilizer at all. Then we have penalization of utilities if they lose more than 10% of their water. So this means that utilities are always motivated to be more efficient and to not lose as much water. We have water meters on all households, so we can keep track of how much everybody uses, and if there's a problem, if there's a leak somewhere, we can find it very quickly. We also have had a lot of focus on public campaigns and education about these issues so that the public is very aware of how much water means and how important it is. For example, even with a growing population, we've actually had a falling use of water. And of course, nobody knows how that's going to go with an even more growing population. But at the moment, it's quite impressive if you actually see the statistics. We also have a full recovery of our water prices, which is what I mentioned before. This is completely consumer funded through either the taxes or what they pay for the water at their household. These are the original designated areas of drinking water interest, which are the places in Denmark that are completely mapped now. And we more or less have geological maps that cover the whole of Denmark with a focus on groundwater protection. Some of the challenges that we still face in Denmark are pesticides from agriculture, industry and private use. We also have chemical substances from former and present industries. Nitrates from agriculture is something that we focus a lot on. Saltwater intrusion, this is especially on the smaller islands. If they have a large abstraction of groundwater, then you have saltwater intrusion that comes into your reservoir. And we can also see local problems with different naturally occurring substances such as arsenic, fluoride, strontium. And of course, we also have overexploitation in major cities. So this is places like Aarhus, Copenhagen. They may see problems with a lowering water table or with more local pollution that is actually caused by overexploitation. This is what I was mentioning before. So these are the different kinds of protection zones that we have around our abstraction wells. Very close, we have a well protection zone where you're not allowed to do anything. And then outside of that, we find out where the surface is actually more vulnerable to intrusion by pesticides or nitrates and so on. And this is where we have a more targeted protection, which is managed by the municipalities. So this is now we're getting into the actual groundwater mapping of Denmark. You can see that these are the number of square kilometers that we mapped from 2000 till 2015, and it really added up at the end of that period. We really decided we need to get this going, and like I said, at 2015 it was changed to more of an operational maintenance activity. So we've spent approximately 360 million euros mapping 40% of Denmark. And now from 2016 and onwards, we've had a reduced budget. It's more continuous updating of existing data and results. We have national standards and guides for consistency so that all areas have more or less the same kind of focus or focus that's adapted to their needs. And we also have standardized methods, databases, and softwares to help us with these activities. The process is more or less that at the startup, you have the municipalities who come to us and say something has changed. And then we evaluate, we prioritize, we evaluate what are the original geological models like, what are the original groundwater models like, are they good enough for our standards today, or can we update them and make them better? And if we decide that we can update them and make them better, then we start collecting data, doing detailed modeling. We have both at our department, we have geologists who sit with the geological modeling. We also have hydrologists who make the groundwater models, or we hire consultants who can do the modeling for us as well. And then we delineate catchment areas, well protection zones, and make an assessment of the vulnerability of the region. These results are then handed off to the municipalities. This is another illustration of the process, and it's a circle because we're constantly working on it. Some of these areas, it's the second or third time that they're being mapped because we have more data and we know more. The type of data that we use ranges a lot. I'm going to go into more detail with that here. This is a basic system of all the kind of data that we actually use. We have both databases for boreholes, which is our database is called Jupiter. That's where we have all our borehole data. Then we have GADA, which is all our geophysical data. And then we have a database for our geological models as well. And these are all kind of integrated. We also have some standard systems that we always use, Aarhus Workbench for processing geophysics, and Geoscene 3D for creating our geological models. And all of them are fully integrated, so I can collect data directly from GADA into Geoscene 3D, and I can upload data that I've processed directly to GADA from Aarhus Workbench. This is all of the water abstraction wells in Denmark in Jupiter right now. We have a lot more boreholes than this in Jupiter. There's also technical wells and so on, but this is all of the water-related ones. They all have unique borehole identification numbers, so we all know what we're talking about. They have GPS coordinates and measurement methods. They have lithological records and filter locations, water level records, past and current abstraction licenses and records, and water chemistry records. So as an example, I just picked a borehole here just south of Skiu. And this is the lithological record that we have. It's a circle diagram, which sometimes can be a little bit difficult to understand, but it's there and it's more or less detailed. The quality of it varies, and we have an internal system for how to categorize the quality of our boreholes and what we actually want to use them for. This is an example of the same borehole, the measurements of phosphorus in the water, and you can see that it's kind of varying. We have a couple of different analyses throughout the year since 2010, and the red line at 0.15, that is the our set limit that we don't want to have any more phosphorus than this in our water. So you can see in 2022 they actually had a measurement which was at that limit, and that might mean that it's something we want to focus on in the next modeling of this area, whether there's a general problem with phosphorus. This is GADA. This is all the geophysics that we have in GADA at the moment. And the yellow parts are SkyTem. You can see that that's a pretty popular method for us. A lot of it has been collected and much of it has actually been developed for the groundwater mapping industry. So we've had a lot of focus on how do we map large areas of Denmark quickly, cheaply, easily. SkyTem is one of the preferred methods there. We also have TTEM for smaller areas. The penetration depth of TTEM is not as high as SkyTEM, which means that we usually use this for more local areas where we might want to focus on the vulnerability of the region. But of course, you also see geoelectrics, seismics, MRS as well. And it's a really big mix of methods that we have access to. I just brought out two examples, so seismics and SkyTem. I took these two examples because they have quite different focuses. So SkyTem measures the electrical conductivity of the subsurface by putting out an electromagnetic field, which then we measure the responding secondary electromagnetic field that is returned by the subsurface. So these are more contrasts in the electrical conductivity in the subsurface, whereas seismics really measures the structural interfaces between things with different physical properties in the subsurface by sending sound waves down, which are then reflected off these boundaries. And they look quite different as well. So with SkyTem, for example, you see these kind of more smooth indications of where you have a change in the subsurface, whereas with seismics, you see more definitively that there's a change between two subsurface structures. This is just an example of one of the limitations of SkyTem, for example, where it's good in regions with high soil conductivities, which is Denmark has a very clay soil. So that's why we have SkyTem and TTEM, which we use a lot because they're easy to collect and they work really well in the Danish geology. But large portions of raw data is actually deleted due to couplings. This is a data set that I actually processed in the last year. And you can see that all the gray parts, they're all data that I had to delete due to coupled data. And a lot of them are corresponding to locations of the cities or this is a cable, like an overhead electricity cable. So you also had a lot of data deleted there. It's also unable to resolve thin or geographically limited areas. So in order to help there, you might go out and collect more data, for example, geoelectrics or TTEM as well, to supplement SkyTEM. But we use SkyTEM a lot because it's fast and it's easy and it's cheap. And we have to balance, you know, what kind of information we get with how much money we have to spend getting that information. Then, like I said, we also have a database of our existing models. This is foam. It means fælles offentlig hydrostratigrafisk model, and it's basically a geological model that covers the entirety of Jutland, and it's composed of several other geological models which we've kind of stitched together, which means that the boundaries between them aren't always perfect. And I just drew a profile line. This is all something that's publicly accessible as well. You can just go onto the website and you can make your own profiles as well if you're interested. And then you can see here what I actually got out of that profile line. And these are all the layers. These are also standardized layers. We use the same layers across the entire foam model. So that makes it easy to compare what we're talking to. And this is something that's constantly updated as well. Sometimes we get a modeler who says, I'm seeing something here that doesn't correspond to any of the layers that we have standardized for foam. Can we add another layer? And if there's a good enough argument for it, then that's what we do. That's also why you see that they're all called something in the thousands. It's designed so that you can put in additional layers where necessary. So what happens if we find out that we need more data? Well, then we go and collect it, at least if we can make a good enough argument for it. And there's a couple of things that we need to consider in that. First of all, where are we missing the information? How large is the area? Is it something that we just need geoelectrics or we need TTEM to cover it? Or do we need something a lot more surface covering? Is it possible that the data exists elsewhere? Sometimes we run into the problem that data is not in GADA. It's actually hosted by a company maybe, or one of the regions, and they either haven't had the time to upload it into GADA, or sometimes they've had problems uploading it into GADA, and they just haven't gotten around to it after the problem has been solved. Then the question is, what kind of information do we need? Do we need water chemistry? Then we go and do water analyses. Do we need water level measurements? Then we go and measure the water levels. Do we need geophysics? Well, then it's maybe a little bit more involved. What method should we use? What's the target depth? What kind of resolution do we need? What kind of geology do we expect? Because that's also a big component, right? If we have a very clay area, like we have in a lot of Denmark, then something like the TTEM or SkyTEM might be very applicable. But if we have a lot of sand, then we might need to go to georadar or seismics or something else, because the TEM methods won't work that well there. And of course, there are these formalities because we are a state agency. We need to notify the citizens either by phone call, electronic post. Sometimes we even do advertisements in the newspapers if it's a lot of people that we need to make aware of this. And we also need to consider the time of year. Sometimes boreholes may be closed during the winter. Sometimes farmers won't want us to go all over their fields with the TTEM machines if they're right before their harvest time. And once we've collected the data, then we get to the geological modeling. Like I said, we have an integration of all the data types that you need to build a 3D geological model of the subsurface. We pull it directly into Geoscene 3D, and our modelers sit and they do the modeling over a period of months. And this results in a three-dimensional model of the subsurface, usually a layer model, but in some cases we could choose to do a voxel model instead. After the geological model, we move on to hydrological modeling, where we build a model to simulate the surface water flow and the groundwater flow and predict aquifer conditions. We have chosen to delineate particle transport time up to 200 years. So we find out where those particles that are coming into the borehole were 200 years ago. And that's where we cut it off. And then we also have a 100-meter buffer around the wells that we have another protection zone around, and a 300-meter buffer around the well, so we also have protection around. And the levels of protection are then different depending on the area and the kind of problems that they're seeing. The vulnerability assessment is then based on the data that we've collected so far, so the geological model, the hydrological model. And there's a designation applied to special drinking water areas, which we consider a future groundwater resource, as well as catchment areas for waterworks and utilities outside of these special drinking water interests. So just because you're outside these areas that we have deemed a future resource doesn't mean you don't have to protect anything. It just means you're a special case and we look at you separately. We have a zonation guide, which gives a detailed description of how to delineate these vulnerable areas. And like I've said previously, it's the municipalities who are actually responsible for finding out how to execute the protection. The way that we carry out the vulnerability assessment is that we look at the accumulated reduced clay thickness. So this is something that has been studied quite broadly, that reduced clay is capable of actually protecting the groundwater from infiltration of nitrates. How it works with pesticides, that's still up for debate, but this is the data that we have, so this is the basis we're working on. So we map the thickness of the clay, we map the oxidation redox boundary. This is something that you have all the boreholes in the region and you sit and determine the place, the depth, where the color changes in the clay. That's where we find out whether it's oxidated or reduced. And that results in the thickness of reduced clay above the relevant aquifer. Then we also look at water chemistry. Does the water that we're seeing in a region match the protection that we think we have in that clay layer? And if it doesn't match, then we evaluate on a case-by-case basis whether we believe in the water type or we believe in the protection offered by the reduced clay. This is how we actually deem whether it's low, medium, or high vulnerability. So you can see it's something about the properties of the aquifers and cover layers and the groundwater quality type. And if these two don't match, if we have something that doesn't fit into any of those three categories, then we go in and we evaluate that case specifically. And that results in a map that looks more or less like this, where this is the vulnerability to nitrates specifically. And you have either low, medium, or high vulnerability, depending on where it falls in that categories. Something that's very important to us at the EPA in our work is our partners and cooperation. We both cooperate with other institutions such as GEOS, the National Geological Survey of Denmark and Greenland, as well as universities. These are the institutions which could perform scientific research for us, development of new ideas. Sometimes we approach them and say, hey, we want to test this out. Do you have time? Do you have money? Do you have people to do it? And then we find something out so we can maybe improve our work or do it in a slightly different way if it's necessary. And they also, GEOS specifically, hosts our databases. They're the ones who are responsible for both GADA and Jupiter. We work closely together with water utilities and water companies as well. Of course, they're the ones who focus on water supply, water extraction, and it's important to us to find out what are their needs in the future. Maybe they might be thinking of moving their borehole to somewhere else. Then it would be important for us to consider that other region that they're considering as part of our vulnerability mapping, such that we don't have to do twice the work when they later choose to actually move their borehole. And of course, we also work closely with private consulting companies, which perform practical mapping for us. So sometimes we don't have all the manpower necessary to create the geological models ourselves. In that case, we may outsource the work to private companies. So some of the key takeaways from this presentation. The system that we have in Denmark is very detailed. It's also very matured. We have research methods and standards developed over more than 20 years for mapping and protecting the groundwater. But something that's very important to this work is that all of our data, all of our databases, they're public and publicly accessible. Anyone can go in and see what the data is that we use to create our models. And this is not only something that's important for us to work together with other parties, it's important for the landowners who may be targeted or hit by some kind of protection zoning later to actually understand what caused their land to now be in a category where they're not allowed to use pesticides anymore, for example. We also use, or try to use at least, state-of-the-art collection methods such as SkyTim, TTIM, and anything else that we might need. Currently, we're looking at whether there's any methods that we've overlooked in the past 20 years, because sometimes things happen in other parts of the world or other industries that you could use in your industry. So that's something we're looking into right now. Is there anything out there going on that we could adopt? We have specialized software, Geoscene 3D and Aarhus Workbench, to name a few in particular. And these are, as I said, fully integrated. So it makes it very easy for us to work together and work with everyone else. And we have very close collaboration between public institutions and private companies. This is something that's helped by the very large public buy-in. We're very proud of our groundwater in Denmark. It's something that, we return home from holiday and we're so happy to just turn on the tap and have a glass of Danish water. And it's something that the public is very interested in protecting. So right now, for example, with all these cases of PFAS and pesticides and nitrates, you see a lot of newspaper articles actually of the public being very concerned that the drinking water is going to be affected. So they have that gives us a lot of support and allows us to actually do the work that we want to do. I think that's what I had. So thank you for your attention. Okay, perfect.
A couple of audience questions online. I just want to check if someone here in the room has a question. There. Yes.
Okay, so this maybe works. Thank you. That was. It's nice to see such a smorgasbord of data that you have here. But I went into the Jupyter site here and looked at one layer, which is boreholes with known layer order, which is, I guess, very important in this case.
Boreholes with known layer order, you say?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I'm guessing that there is some sort of validation or quality control of the boreholes, but is that for the contractor to do, like a standardized logging of stratigraphy, or is it a post-processing thing?
It's a part of, well, there's different tiers depending on what the borehole is needed for and made for. But as a basis, all people who make the boreholes, so the actual drillers, they go through an education which is standardized in Denmark. There's actually only one school that offers it, and everyone has it. Only takes about 6 weeks or something, so it's not a big deal. But they have to go through it, and part of the requirement is learning how to actually log the stratigraphy that comes up as they're drilling the borehole. So in most cases, this is something that's done by the contractor at the site while they're doing it. For some cases, scientific boreholes, it might be sent to GEOS where they will do a more detailed analysis, biostratigraphy, aging, and so on. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, another question here.
Hello, my name is Alfredo Mendoza, and thank you very much for your presentation. It was very, very interesting, especially the part with the vulnerability mapping. I think it was very good work that you are doing there. I have a question. Is related to this balance between the need for using different kind of resources. We have, in your case, for example, you have the need to use these raw materials, and then the need to extract and to have availability of groundwater. So how do you balance that need in your regulations? How do you, because this is you need the raw materials as part of the aquifer, but also you need the water, and then you need to construct and to do all kind of infrastructure projects. So how do you handle that?
So if I understand your question correctly, it's concerning the balancing of raw materials such as, I mean, in Denmark, we mostly have sand, gravel, chalk, and so on, and then the need for groundwater abstraction.
Yes.
Well, I can start by saying that even though we do have extraction of raw materials in Denmark, it's not that big a market. It's not like you see quarries everywhere. And we also are a lucky country in that we have an abundance of groundwater. So I would say this is not something that we've really needed to concern ourselves with in the past. We have limits on how much you can abstract from each well, which is decided by the municipality, and that's designed to try to balance how much we're pumping up to preserve the reserve of groundwater in our aquifers. But I haven't heard any consideration for, removing the aquifer itself as a part of raw material abstraction. That's not something that I've heard being a problem anywhere in Denmark.
We have gotten a lot of questions in the chat online as well. Thank you so much. We'll have time for one more. One question is, you mentioned that someone just exited an emergency door. Sorry about that. You mentioned that in Denmark you have full cost recovery. Which sectors contribute to this? Only households or also those responsible for nitrate and pesticide contamination?
A tricky question for sure. I mean, the full cost recovery is mainly contributed to by the people who use the water. So that may be industries as well. I mean, obviously we have farmers who abstract groundwater to water their crops. So they would contribute as well. But there is no part of there is no sort of penalty or contribution that's made by farmers after their pollution, so-called pollution, since it is part of their job that they need to spray pesticides and use nitrates. What they are responsible for is cleaning up if there is an actual pollution. If the regions go in and determine that there has been an enormous overuse of nitrates in an area, and this is such a large overuse that it actually has polluted the ground, then this is something that the farmer or the person responsible for the pollution is also responsible for cleaning up. But I don't think that they pay anything extra when they use these pesticides or nitrates.
Thank you. I think that's all the questions that we have time for now. But we'll have plenty of time after the lunch break to go through more questions.
Perfect.
So thank you.
Thank you.
The next speaker here is Espen Auken, who is calling in from Aarhus. He had planned to be here, but arrived home from a long business trip yesterday, so it was a bit too much to get here, unfortunately, but we're very happy to have you online. Espen has been working for many years at Aarhus University and has been professor there, but then decided to try something else. And at the moment, he is leading the TEM company, also in Aarhus. So very welcome, Espen, and please go ahead.
Thank you very much for this nice introduction, Torleif. As Torleif said, I'm now CEO of a new company called TEM Company. I'm a former professor at Aarhus University, where I'm still adjunct professor at the university. And I actually want to thank Frederikke Storm Hansen, the previous speaker, for her very nice presentation of what the EPA does now. And I will give a little bit more history on that. So basically going back before around 2015, and then I will try to visualize or try to explain what that has led to in terms of research and innovation, and also what we almost can refer to as a geophysics hub around Aarhus, consisting of companies and the university group, which is illustrated here. So basically, the hydrogeophysics group, Geofysiksamarbejdet, it's in Danish, at the Aarhus University, and then the very close interaction between companies like SkyTem Surveys, Aarhus Geo Software, which is now Sequent, TEM Company, and then the major international consulting companies, COVI, NIRAS, VSP, Rambøll, and Geophysical Imaging Partners. And then, of course, they all work with the Environmental Protection Agency, and also regions, which has some of the authorities are in this area in Denmark. But I would like to try to give a little bit more of the background of this geophysical hub, and then what it has, how that has created at least 3 spin-out companies and a number of startup companies, and a world-leading position within geophysical methods. So now I'm going back in time. I'm going back to explain what was Geofysiksamarbejdet, and that is basically the predecessor of what Frederikke just talked about. So in 1999, where the National Groundwater Mapping Campaign was initiated by national legislation, there was basically not a lot of knowledge about how to map groundwater resources. There were very limited instruments available, and methods, and not very efficient, and software was also a big problem at the time. So as a part of this, it was decided to also have like a research and an R&D part of the National Groundwater Mapping Campaign, basically supporting it, developing software, developing standardization guidelines, and also support the contractors. The contractors are the ones actually carrying out the surveys. At that time, the authority was not the Environmental Protection Agency, it was the counties in Denmark. A lot of this was also education of geologists and hydrogeologists in geophysical methods. Again, there was very little knowledge in the environment about what could be done and what these methods, how they worked. There were basically at the university, we were running courses 3, 4, 5 times a year in the first 2-3 years, where we were educating all the geologists and hydrologists in the usage of geophysical methods. And then, this, as I said, this was supported by the counties, and there were, I think, around 4 to 6 positions per year for doing all this. And just to show an example of some of the guidelines and standards, this is a guideline and standards for SkyTem measurements. It's a report. You can find it online, actually. And it's from November 2011, and I'm pretty sure that the first version of this one is probably around 2004. There's another example comparison of the DC IP instrument Siskel and TER meters. That has probably been some discussion on usage of these instruments in the groundwater mapping campaign, and then the university would step in and make a comparison on a scientific basis. And the third one I'm going to show here is the TTEM system validation and compares with PACES and ERT. That is, it was again a request from the EPA to verify that the TTEM system could give comparable results with PACES, ERT, and actually also SkyTem. So the outcome of this HGD was methods, new geophysical methods, and SkyTem is a very good example. Aarhus Workbench is another very good example of what came out of it. And GERDA actually also came out of this, because data storage and exchange of data was very quickly seen to be extremely important. And that is what has led today to a very transparent and easy to use system, because all data are stored in these databases, and they can go in and out of the programs. And just a little how where it actually ended with the research involvement, the HGD or the university involvement faded after 2007, and it ended pretty much in 15-16 when the national groundwater campaign ended. But I'm going to come back to that because it actually continued just in another way. And just to give a few examples of instruments developed during those times, pulled array continuous profiling was used until 2010. Today it seems very old-fashioned, but it was a method where you could measure resistivity and you could actually cover relatively large areas. And a lot of the protection of clay layers were measured with or were determined by this method. ERT, Earth resistivity imaging, has been used a lot. It was invented actually by Thorleif Dahlin in Lund. I think it was around 1990. And these systems were there around 2000. But at the time, there was done a lot of standard 40 by 40 meter transient EM using the Proton 47 by Geonics Limited. And I think in the first years, there were 5-6 instruments doing measurements. And in the GARDA database, I believe there is between 40 and 60,000 40 by 40 meter transient EM measurements. So it was a method really used a lot, but it was also clear that more efficiency was needed. That was what led to SkyTEM. We also developed a high power TEM system. It was a prototype SkyTEM system, and I'm going to show you a fun picture of that. And in 12, the HCD WalkTEM system also came. And this is actually this system. You can see how clumsy and old-fashioned it looked, but this was really fancy equipment. The guy in the middle picture is working with the Proton 47, and you can see it's both cold and dirty. But with this system, you could get deep. There was also made L-log boreholes. That was another method we worked with at the university, and where you could take water samples and measure conductivity and so on. That's the bottom lower picture. Then SkyTEM was a huge development managed and carried out by Professor Kurt Sørensen, which was my boss at that time. And the first measurement was done in 2002. And SkyTEM, these two pictures is with the old system to the left, and then you see on the bottom right picture is the modern SkyTEM system, which is really a very efficient production engine. And I'm going to come back and talk a little bit about more about SkyTEM in a few slides. Then after 15, so I call it post GFS, the collaboration with the EPA and the counties, the invention of TTEM came up, and that was for mapping of farm fields, actually for nitrate vulnerability mapping and estimation of flow fields in the top 100 meters. That was the driver for it. Now it's used for a lot of other stuff, but that was what drove the development, and also actually mapping of pathways in the subsurface for point source contaminations. Now there is a brand new instrument, STEM, and I'm going to come back to that also later. And this is actually TTEM running on a nice warm summer day. You see the receiver is at the back and the transmitter is in the front, and then you are basically running the ATV on the fields, and it's measuring continuously while you're driving, and you get a full measurement every 10 meters down to, depending on configuration, 110 to 180 meters. Software, I'm not going to talk much about it, but that actually was also extremely important, and we spent a lot of time on that because there was hardly any software back in 1990. You have to remember how little compute power there were available. But from a research perspective, with development of a code called Aarhus In. It's really the inversion code, and it's today the backbone of many airborne inversions or inversions used worldwide. It's a part of Aarhus Workbench. which was also developed as a with a vision to integrate all data in one common platform, which was there was nothing close to what that program could do in the beginning. And then there was also Aarhus Workbench was also driven by a need for actually building the data in the Gerda database, because there were no softwares available which could actually convert the different data types at that time formats into something which could be imported into Gerda. So that was also the role of Workbench in the beginning. Then there was SkyTeam inversion added in 2004, PACES inversions, and there was ERT. ERT data has always been converted in REST2D right from the start. There was also developments after 15, building hydrostratigraphical models, but this was never used by the EPA, but it was used in research projects, and it's actually used several places in the world, this system where you integrate geological information and geophysical information, and you get a hydrostratigraphical model, which can then be used in your groundwater modeling program. It's used in some campaigns or campaigns in New Zealand and also the US. All of this needs a lot of funding when you're doing so much work. And Geofysiksamarbejdet, as I said, was funded by first the counties and then the EPA. And then we at the university did a lot of surveys in Denmark with 40 by 40 meter TEM. We had PACES. We did a lot of SkyTeam. And a lot of projects worldwide with SkyTeam, and I can just to mention a few. We have been mapping the Galapagos Islands, the Mayotte Islands out of Madagascar. We actually flew Yellowstone, and there is even a nature paper on that survey. There was done a lot of work in Holland, and so on and so on. A lot of the funding had also come from the Innovation Fund Denmark. This and some of the other Danish foundations starting, and this started really from around 2010. And then Interreg and other EU project has been important for us. And actually in 2020, the research group were about 30 researchers, PhD student and postdoc. So it was a fairly big group at that time. Okay, now I want to change or I want to say so where did this end, and why is it that I call it a geophysical hub in the Aarhus area? So if I go into from the university group, there has been created 3 spin-out companies. SkyTeam Surveys, it was founded in 2003. And at that time, it was really a system for water. I remember the deal was that we could get paid to make these, to fly the system, if we could get the same data quality as what could be produced with the Proton 47 systems. And that was that carried a lot of a major part of the funding for the first development. The SkyTeam system has slowly gained market shares with new frame systems, higher transmitter moments, and a highly increased production. SkyTeam Surveys is a company where research and development has always been closely integrated with the into the company, as they have basically developed and enhanced the system year after year ever since 2003. And today, SkyTeam is a major player. I think, if I heard, they have about 50% of the world market for airborne EM within groundwater and geotechnical methods, and also, of course, mineral exploration with their different systems. And they are about 18 employees today, offices in Canada, USA, South Africa, and Australia. So that is one outcome of all this development. Then another company where I was also involved was Aarhus Geosoftware. It was funded in 2015, and it is really the carrier of, or they develop Aarhus Workbench, and they also develop REST2D and REST3D, which some of you might know, and they did that from 2015. Aarhus Workbench has gained a reputation as a very reliable tool for airborne EM inversion, and so has Rest2D and Restin for ERT. And these are tools which is used worldwide. They were acquired by Sequent. Sequent is a big New Zealand company, which is actually now owned by an American company, and they produce products like Leapfrog, which I'm sure that some of you have used or is using. I think they are 10 employees today in 2023, in around that number. And then there is a company where I'm working and I'm the CEO. It's called Temp Company. We changed name from Aarhus Instruments, and the new name basically should indicate that if you want to do transient EM, then you have to go to us. It was funded in 2020, and we are also doing a lot of instrument research and development, production and sales. And right now we have 2 instruments, TTEM, and we also produce a new system called STEM. And there is a very ambitious development plan in the next 3 to 4 years of new instruments. We have been through a rapid expansion because we were so lucky to get an investment by the Paul Jensen Foundation, and we were 5 employees in January, and now we are actually 18. And I'm gonna just show a few slides before I get to my conclusion. So our vision is to create easy to use geoscanners for groundwater exploration. And when I say easy to use, they should be easy to use to non-experts, because one of the things we have experienced working with these geophysical instruments and softwares is that they are often very specialized and they can be extremely hard to use. And but when we believe that integrating modern technology really can make these instruments easier and more applicable, and by that also we can do something good for the world, and that's where we see ourselves as producing instruments which will mitigate the worldwide groundwater problems caused by the climate crisis. And there are 2 pictures here. One is a completely dry riverbed, so there is too little water, which is a big problem around the world. And the picture to the right is from a flooding actually in Denmark, and we often have the problem in Denmark that we got too much water in the landscape. But all of this is tied to how the subsurface looks like. And a little bit of our history, it started in 2015, where we started to develop the TTEM system. And you can actually see on the pictogram, on the pictures, how it all started with just 4 poles and some instruments, and then a little bit more advanced in 15 also. And then in 17, the system looked like the picture to the right. And then in 19, and I should actually have a picture of how it looks today, but that's on the next slide. So it was created in 2020 and 2023. We got this this investment, which really allows us to rethink the company vision and to think big. And now we are, as I said, 18 employees. And we work with groundwater. This is our focus. So basically, you make an image of the subsurface. You end up with pictures like this, where the reds could be the sand layers and the blues could be the clay layers. And you make an interpretation of this, and then at the end you really want to put a well to obtain clean groundwater for drinking and irrigation purposes. These pictures here is from Kenya, I think. And this is actually from a demo this summer in Kenya. You can see they are working with TTEM. TTEM has been used a lot in refugee camps and host communities, where the result has been extremely good for locating wells. STEM is actually it's another system we have just released. It works like the HCD WalkTEMs, the WalkTEM instrument, or the ProTEM for those of you who knows those. And it's just to show how easy you can see. This is basically how it's controlled from an app, and the instrument just has one button with the on/off, and then the rest is basically controlled in this environment, which is so familiar to many people. And I have this is from a training session in Kenya in August, and they have there's 2 instruments there now, and basically this crew here, after just 1 to 2 hours of training, they were able to run these surveys themselves, and At the end, it took like I heard a measurement of it took like 10 minutes and 30 seconds to roll out the system, make the measurement, and roll it in again. So that also says something about that if we can make the instruments easy to use, all of a sudden they can find usage at people which would never have the chance to work with instruments like this before. And just some different configurations. I'm not going to dwell on that.
Espen, you have exhausted your time now.
Okay, I'm also done. Yeah. Rambøll are the major consultant companies as Rambøll, VSP, NEAS, and COVI, and the customers there is the Environmental Protection Agency. And I'm just gonna go to, so what come out of it in conclusion? Groundwater resources in Denmark is well mapped and managed. We have a world-leading hydrogeophysical hub centered around the research and innovation environment at the university. There are several new companies exporting the technology, and there are several global consulting companies selling the technology worldwide. And thank you for listening. And I'm sorry I exhausted my time. I thought I had 30 minutes to alive.
For 20 minutes, but
okay.
Thank you very much. And I think we need to get on with the next speaker then, and save questions and discussions for after lunch then. So Peter. So the next speaker is Peter Dahlqvist, who works for the other way around. Works for the Swedish Geological Survey here at the Lund office, and Peter has been very instrumental in in groundwater mapping here in Sweden for a number of years. Yeah, there's a button somewhere, isn't it?
Now, perhaps, yes. Okay, thank you. So my name is Peter, and I before I began at the survey, I worked at the county board here in Skåne, and I visited Denmark and saw what they had done. So we, when I started at the survey, we tried to get the SkyTem method also to Sweden. But I will begin short with the geological survey, where we have the groundwater mapping. So why do we map groundwater in Sweden? Yes, we are the national agency responsible for rock, soil, and groundwater mapping in Sweden. And where do we map? We map especially where we have shortage, scarcity for groundwater, and where we know that we have valuable groundwater resources, because it's a big country and we don't have neither the money nor the equipment or personnel to do that in the Danish style yet, at least. We have four parts in the last years. We have our national monitoring of groundwater levels and groundwater quality. Then we have local surveys, small local surveys of aquifers, and then we have more large-scale SkyTem mapping. And the groundwater levels we measured at, it's been increased the last years. So now we have about 600 wells that we measure. I think most of them at least four times or 4 to 6 times a day. And you can follow most of them online to see the levels. And we do this to the left, the current groundwater levels, those national maps we do updated every week. And then you can follow, then you can see earlier groundwater levels on the top. Here you can follow I think it's 4 or 5 years back. So here you can see approximately the same time, 4 years back, and you can see how they differ. And then we also model the future groundwater levels in dry, normal, or wet for the next 30 or 60 days. Sorry. And then we have the groundwater quality, where we have, I think it's about over 1,100 wells, and it's increasing very much. So it's good, but unfortunately, only now we have from each well, but in a few years, we will have national maps for about 30 substances. And then we have the local scale aquifer mapping. We do it's mostly about eskers. We have a few areas with sedimentary rock or crystalline basement, but mostly esker environments. And those we make about 30 reports every year. And we use earlier investigations and do some drillings, geophysics, spring inventories, and try to summarize everything into reports. And they can all be downloaded in our web page. So, and then we have the SkyTem mapping, which we began in 2011. And that was the first pilot project just located here south of Malmö. And everything went well, and our bosses thought it was looked good, so we could raise some money to do more investigations. And on the picture here, we can see the Minister of Industry, who was visiting one of the SkyTem surveys in 2018, I think, in Halland. And why did we do this? Yes, as been pointed out before, it enables the collection of large amounts of data. And I really like the three-dimensionality, and it gives us much more, it's easier to do the groundwater models. We have, let's take this one. The first one was, as I said before, 2011, and then we made, it's been done in the south of Sweden. So you can see the purple or pink areas here where we have made it, and which years. And in total, we have made about 6,000 square kilometers in Sweden. So it's not as much in Denmark, but it's quite large areas anyway. And the best example, perhaps, or one of the best, is where we found, or we showed where they could drill for a well for water for the municipality, and this little island close to Gotland, where they usually had trucks every day, several trucks every day driving on this ferry with water. So they saved about 500,000 crowns every year, every summer, just to they didn't had to drive those trucks every day. And it's been going on for, I think, 8 or 9 years now. So it's very good. And we've made reports of every single survey, and they are all can all be downloaded on the web page. And this is the first one in Gotland, and here we can also one good example to show where we can compare resistivity data with 3 wells that were drilled very close to the survey. And you see they are approximately a few hundred meters. You can see B and C are about 500 meters apart, and B and C are they're not so similar in the resistivity signal. And you can also see that the water content in the bedrock differs quite a lot too. So then we could use this interpretation when we did more regional modeling. And here is another one on the east side of Gotland. We have this bedrock dipping to the southeast. And we have different kind of limestone and marl. And we made this geological model and drilled, and together with the interpretation from the geological and resistivity model, we got quite a good result here with a good producing well. On the island of Öland, there were a lot of water issues one summer, and they asked MSB for money for climate adaptation. Before that, all climate adaptation in Sweden was money was given for when we had too much water. But this was the first time they were given money for not having any water. So we got some of that money and covered, I think it was almost 80% of the island with Skytem. So we could do a quite good geological model. We also made this voxel model for both the bedrock and the sedimentary rocks and the soil layer. And then we found a lot of those sprickzoner, fracture zones, sorry. And some of them we drilled and some were really dry, but in some of them we found quite good, quite much water too. So good results also there. On the west coast of Sweden, we don't have so much sedimentary rock. So, but anyway, we wanted to try out the method in 2 areas where we had crystalline rock, and but in both areas, at least, we have quite thick soil layers and quite much clay. and we got good results, and mostly in these two areas we focused on doing like the one up in the corner here. We made those clay thickness layer like you showed earlier, the vulnerability maps. So it was really good results. And this is the same, you can see south of the last one, but also very much clay layers which we could map and compare with our soil maps and make them better. Here we have an example close to Lake Vättern where we mapped a small area, and we changed the distribution of the Visingsö sandstone, which is quite a good aquifer. And then we also located upper and lower aquifers in sand bodies. And we could, one thing that we really is that the SkyTem surveys have given in all of our areas is this soil thickness maps. So we have in all of the areas we are they are very much better than earlier. And in Östergötland, we made this. We have this Cambrian-Silurian bedrock. We could easily map out the different limestone and shale and sandstone layers, and also increase the or find some sand and gravel below clay layers, so we could better map the aquifers. We got due to the dry years in 16, 17, 18, we got quite a lot of money in from the government. So in 2019, we made quite a lot of SkyTem surveys in southernmost part of Skåne and some part of Blekinge. And we had some agreements with municipalities where so they got condensed surveys in some areas. And here we can see an example of the thickness and approximately at what depth we have the chloride levels are too high or are high, so they will there we don't want to drill to that depth. Here we have made a voxel model for the soil layer that was used to make 3D models for Hornaåsen and Vannebergaåsen for a local mapping project. In Vombsänkan, we made this survey too, and we have about we made some drillings and some geophysical logging, and they correspond very well, both the resistivity, the geological model, and the geophysical logging. Nu ska jag gå tillbaka där. And the last one is from Southwest Scania, and here we have this report isn't finished yet, but will be. And here we have a example for you can see the profile here, and this is the resistivity at the surface. So we can see quite big difference, and we have difference in the till. We have more clay here and a little less here, but we can see big difference in if we want to, for example, water protection area, it would be a huge difference in those two areas with a low, very low and quite high resistivity soil layers. And all those reports can be downloaded. And we also have our 3D models and the resistivity sections and resistivity maps in 3D 3D. Yeah, you can download it on this website. Okay. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Peter. We are running a bit short of time, but we have one quick question here in the audience. Otherwise, we will have more time. We will have plenty of time for questions and discussions after.
Yeah.
Okay, I think so. We move on to the next and last speaker here, Tina Martin, who is a researcher in the Division of Engineering Geology. And before joining us here in Lund, Tina was working for the Geological Survey in Germany, Berlin.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess you can just...
Yep. You can hear me, right? Yeah. In contrast to the other speakers before, to the previous speakers, I will now focus on one certain research project and go a bit more into detail. And in that research project, we have used geophysics to derive or to get out hydrogeological properties of the underground. And this was funded by Trafikverket, which is the Swedish transportation authority, I think it's called. And as a cooperation partner, we had Aarhus University, what Espen was talking about. And of course, we had a lot of help from other people, it's my colleagues here in the room, but also French and German colleagues. Yeah, I don't think I need to talk a lot about the motivation. Torleif has shown that before, but of course for Trafikverket, it's very important to know the underground properties before they start to build a road or construct a tunnel or building bridges or whatever. I mean, in order to avoid any flooding or sliding or contamination. So we thought our let's say, scientific research question was how much hydrogeological information can we actually get out of geophysical data? And this is why we had this research project. This was running for 2 years. It just ended by the end of last year. And yeah, our aim was to develop a reliable and time and cost efficient methodology for spatial mapping of these groundwater conditions. Because in contrast to the, let's say, existing methods, where you just get point-wise information, geophysics enables you to get to cover larger areas. And within that project, we have used 2 different geophysical methods. So this is a DCIP method, stands for direct current induced polarization. And from that method, it's a geoelectrical method, and you get derived the resistivity, but also, as we call it, the chargeability, because the underground also acts like as a kind of a battery, or can act as a battery. So it can storage charges. So, and this gives you an additional information about the underground properties. So you have the resistivity and you have the chargeability. And then from that, you can, as I said, derive information about what kind of geological material it is and how much water, let's say, is there. And then there is the other method that's called NMR, nuclear magnetic resonance. This, and the S stands for surface NMR. And this method is the only geophysical method that directly measure the water content, because in contrast to SkyTem or to DCIP or to seismic, you can only indirect derive information about geology or about the water. But NMR enables you to go direct for the water content. So, but then you might ask, okay, if we have NMR, why don't we use NMR? Why haven't you used NMR or someone else? Because it's very sensitive to any noise, to any anthropogenic noise. So this is why we also had a look in our research project about how robust is the methods and where can it actually be used. And in that project, we went to 3 different test sites in the south of Sweden, and our test site criteria were to have interesting geology, hydrogeology. We looked for these different noise levels. Of course, it should be accessible and, if possible, related to one of Trafikverket's infrastructure projects. So this is why we went first to site 1, which is close to Svedala, and we measured DCIP and NMR there. Then we went up to Mariestad. This was our site 2, and we thought this was the site with the lowest noise and this was a medium noise, but we could already see here that for the NMR it was not working at all, and here we hardly working. So we said, okay, now we should maybe go to a site which is in the middle of nowhere, so no power lines, no pipes, no roads, no nothing. And this is then why we went to Mjölka longer. And what I will present today is just from that test site, the results. So this is Mjölkalanger. So yeah, this is a test site in the south of Sweden. So we have all this post-glacial sediment there, and this test site was characterized by sand and clay. And we measured along 4 profiles. So we did 4 DCIP profiles. We had these NMR soundings, so the green dots here, and because we wanted, of course, or we needed to compare our data to the actually hydrogeological properties, and they can be won with drilling. So we had a company, Niras, I think it was also mentioned already, this company. They were coming from Denmark, and they did these HPT drillings. HPT stands for hydraulic profiling tool. And what you do is you drill continuously, and then you inject water, and you measure how much water actually you inject and what was the pressure. And from that, you can derive hydraulic conductivity, estimated hydraulic conductivity. But we also did slug test, or they did slug test. And in addition to our field investigation, we also collected some samples, and we investigated them in the lab with the same methods as we used in the field. So this is a lab NMR method. And this is a SIP or IP method. And here you can actually measure the hydraulic conductivity from these samples. And starting with some results. So starting with the NMR for profile 1. So you see all these different soundings that have been made. And then you get kind of a profile. So from the south, so from here to the north. And what you get now, it's the water content. This is what you can see. And then, what is obvious is that you have a higher water content on the surface, and then it lowers. And there might be a small gradient from the south to the north. This is profile 3, so I will focus on these two profiles also for the other results. And you can see here, compared to profile 1, it has a much lower water content, but still it has the highest water content on the top, and then it's decreasing. And then just from the west to the east, along this line, but you see we have only these 4 soundings, so it's a lot of interpolation. But you can see that what I haven't mentioned is that here it starts a big lake to the east, and you can see actually where the water content, so there is a hydraulic gradient towards not the sea, the lake. So these are the results for the DCIP. So this is what we get. It was our longest profile, almost 800 meters. So Simon and I, we needed 2 days to measure that. And this is resistivity of the underground. This is chargeability of the underground. And we have also used Aarhus-Inf, this inversion. And based on some laboratory equations, you can actually calculate the permeability out of these 2 properties. So this is now a section of the permeability. And before we start to interpret something, you see, for example, these kind of things, there's some kind of noise. So probably either there was a pipe which was not known, or there went something wrong when we measured there. So, and then you also see that it smears out to the in depth. So this is why we don't interpret these kind of results. So we focus on the first, let's say 20-25 meters, and then you can see you have areas with higher resistivities on top. So this probably we did a descent, and then the resistivity is decreasing while the chargeability or the phase here is increasing. So that's probably the clay layer. And based on that, you see that we have areas with higher permeabilities within the first 8 to 10 meters, and below this you have lower permeabilities, which makes sense if this is clay and you have sand above. Similar results for profile 3, but here when you just focus on the permeability, you see you have higher permeabilities on top and then lower ones in depth. These are now the HPT and the slug test results. And then, because this is where we need to calibrate, not to calibrate, but at least to compare our data to. And these red lines, you see it's a dip. So we had, for each of the 2 profiles, we had 3 drillings, in that case, 300, 400, and 700 meters. And then you see these red lines. So this is the estimated hydraulic conductivity. So, and here are the big values and here are the low values. You see that with its decreasing with depth. So as deeper is lower the hydraulic conductivity. And the green ones, and here maybe I should mention the yellow ones, it's where the limit of this method is. So when it comes in that area, it's getting very unreliable, uncertain. And the green ones are actually the slug tests. And then you can see that sometimes it fits quite well with the red data. Sometimes you have an offset, which is even for profile 3 the same. You see that, yeah, sometimes you have a big offset. So then it's getting difficult when we want to get out these properties from geophysical data and we want to compare. Then it's always difficult. Okay, with what can I compare actually? Because different methods give me different results. But when we start to compare now, I have put the 3 drillings in here, but it's hard to see. So here they are again. But in general, at least for these 2 cases, so higher permeabilities means also higher hydraulic conductivity. So this fits quite well. So with depth, it's decreasing. This fits here also quite good. Here it's, so let's say, la. And when it comes to profile 3, this fits quite good. But then when it comes here, for example, and you see that at least the red line, the hydraulic conductivity shows high values, but we are here in the clay layer. So here, obviously, it makes more sense to compare to the slug test because it has shown that it's very low hydraulic conductivity. So kind of summarizing that or putting that into, let's say, one graph. So now I have taken actually the slug test, because now I'm trusting more the slug test than this HBT results. So I've taken the slug test results and compare them with the results which I just have derived from the IP values, and then I'm getting a picture like that. So it's neither good nor bad. Let's say it's quite average. But to conclude at least the field results, what we could see, or what we have found out, is that the DCIP and the surface NMR methods got us good results in the field if it's not too noisy for the NMR in general. And then it seems to be possible to get the hydraulic conductivity and permeability out of the IP parameters, but this depends actually on several factors. For example, the equation I have used, or the equation that was used in Aarhus Inf, because they are based on lab experiments and they are not, of course, specifically related to that test site. And it also depends on the saturation, on the soil conditions, and as I said, which tests I actually compare it with. So let's summarize. We got some correlations, but they are not good enough yet. And this is why we also did these tests or these measurements in the laboratory. So the research center, the UFZ in Leipzig, so they did the hydraulic conductivity measurements from different samples from different test sites. And then they got hydraulic conductivity values between 10 to -4 to 10 to -8, so it's quite a big span. And comparing that now, these results, so these lab results with the values from NMR, because what I have shown now for DCIP, you can also do for NMR. Based on some lab experiments, you can also calculate the hydraulic conductivity from NMR measurements, and this I have done. And then you get a picture which looks much better, at least in the lab. So there's more, kind of a relationship, let's say. But you see these two. They are the one which I have marked red here because they are the one with very low hydraulic conductivities, and they are also measured with another test MODI. So it's a bit difficult to include them here. So this is why they are a bit separated. Though they fit much better when I compare now with the IP values. And now you see also that the rest looks much better. So there is a relationship between these IP parameters or NMR parameters and the hydraulic conductivity. It's just for the moment a bit difficult to transfer to the field. Yeah, so this gives me, or comes to the final conclusion. So in the field, the IP measurements and NMR measurements gave good results. Actually, the hydraulic conductivity or permeability can be calculated from the parameters. After calibration, you get quite good correlations between the hydraulic conductivity or the hydraulic properties and geophysical results. But again, they depend on the equation, on the empirical constant, and what I have not mentioned also on the sample holder. Because usually it would make sense to have one sample holder where you do all the measurements instead of, as I have done this, so I've measured the hydraulic conductivity in the lab with one sample holder, IP with another one, and NMR with a third one. But still, it's still ongoing work. We are also working on new approaches, how to calculate that, which might reflect better the conditions on the site. We going to adapt to previous laboratory equations and do more experiments. And right now we are planning another research project, which includes also borehole investigations. So, however, or as a summary, think or we believe that both methods are very promising to obtain the spatial hydrogeological properties, but needs a bit more research. So, thank you.
We got a question from an online participant. In the widely adopted integrated water resources management models, groundwater flow has often been overlooked due to data gaps and the complexity of aquifer systems. Are there any recommendations for open access? Yeah, for open access data, methodologies, or tools to tackle these issues, particularly in the MENA region or Africa? So recommendations for open access data and methodologies or tools to find data gaps and the complexity of aquifer systems.
Let's see here. Of course, this policy of making all the data related to groundwater and other common commodities open access is it's a very good idea. Generally, these type of data have been gathered with the help of common resources, and it's very important that they are made available. And in Denmark, you have been pioneering this, of course, and in Sweden, it is also a lot of effort invested in making data open access, like Peter also demonstrated here in his talk, that everything is available, or at least you're trying to make it available over your website. And there's also a European Union directive about open access data. I know from experiences of working in other parts of the world that this is generally not the case in other countries, and it can be very, very difficult to get access to data in Latin America or Africa, for example. So I would definitely advocate trying to pursue this, but it's a political process, of course, and not very easy. Do you have?
I think I can add something to this point at least, because at the Danish EPA we have quite a lot of international collaborations as well. We, for example, have sector collaborations in South Africa, Kenya, Morocco, Ethiopia, and India is starting up right now. And this is something that we see as a challenge in a lot of these countries when it comes to groundwater, that the data is not readily accessible, not even to, you know, the government agencies. The history for a lot of these places makes it so that the public is very distrustful of the government agencies and is not willing to share the data that they might have themselves. For fear that, you know, they might be caught doing something that they shouldn't be doing, or that their rights might be infringed upon in some cases. And I think one of the ways that we try to tackle this in our collaborations with these countries is the educational part, because it's so important that the public actually understands why we need that data and what the gain is for the society at large when we have this access to data. And what we see is that when people get involved locally, they're much more likely to actually share the data because they can see the benefits on their own person as well. So that would be my input, that, you know, education, especially in rural communities, is one of the best ways of getting more access to data and open data.
I can add that in Sweden we have the problem with the legislation with the municipality wells, and all those all data from those wells and the close area is secret. So we are not able to show that on our websites, or they can't show it either. So it's a bit tricky. And some of the results from also from our investigations, SkyTEM's investigations, we don't hear of if we don't ask them. Perhaps they have done some drillings and even good wells of it, but we don't hear of it because it's secret. But that's not as in Denmark here.
Just to quickly follow up, because this is something that we also have a discussion on in Denmark with the, making the location of wells secret. It's something that the EU, for example, has been asking us why we don't do in order to protect from terrorist attacks, for example. But it's something that we push back on because we see the benefit of open data as being a lot more valuable than the protection from a possible terrorist attack on one or two wells. So it's a political discussion for sure, and something that takes a while to change.
Okay. And then, yeah, when it comes to methods, was also part of the question. And I think you've seen some good examples of that here. And generally, of course, it's a matter of gathering and making sure that all historic data is really being made available, and then going from a top-down approach. So you start getting the overall picture, so you can see where are potential areas that you contain valuable resources, and then find out what kind of information do I need in order to be able to manage and protect these resources and use them in a long-term sustainable way, so you don't risk to have damage by contamination or overexploitation. But it's complicated, of course, because as we've said here before, groundwater is an invisible resource, and so the ways the tools we can use for investigating them are indirect in many cases. Yeah.
Thank you. And another question from an online participant. I'm interested in the political administrative aspect. When there is contamination or another problem in groundwater that is transboundary, which is between municipal or regional limits, how is this managed and solved? Matters of accountability between private and public actors can lead to conflicts.
I guess I can try to answer this. Like I said, I'm with the state, so this is really more in the domain of the municipalities, and how the municipalities handle issues like this is very dependent on the municipality as well. I know that Aarhus municipality tries to maintain all of their water abstraction within the boundaries of their municipality. So that also means when we are evaluating where the groundwater actually comes from in Aarhus, they want to see the result of, all of their groundwater coming from within the municipality, which is not always the case, because groundwater it doesn't follow the boundaries of a municipality just like that. So it is a point of contention sometimes between municipalities, how they actually solve issues of pollution. But it's not something that I'm involved in, so I don't think that I can answer this in much more detail than that.
I haven't worked in these issues, but transboundary problems are, of course, tricky and require good collaborations and political agreements and solutions.
Thank you. Do we have another question from the audience here in the room? Yep.
Yeah, thank you. So just to follow up on the open data question. So we have seen that, for example, in Denmark, you have the different databases, Gerda, Jupyter, etc. And you have this platform in Sweden as well, where you share some of the data. And I know that we have a similar one both in Greece, but in the Netherlands as well. So my question is, why does every country has to invent their own solutions? And what happens with countries which are not as fortunate as we are, and they cannot do the same? Is there any idea or discussion about having a consortium where can, instead of selling those solutions, giving them for free?
It's a really good question, and it's something that in our international collaborations we work a lot with as well. Right now, I'm project coordinator for the groundwater collaboration with South Africa, for example, and databases and access to data is something that we're looking at because they have their own databases, but sometimes they're not as open as they would like them to be. I know that, for example, in Ethiopia, where our collaborations have just been starting up, some of our experts have traveled there and have been absolutely shocked, to see so many different physical papers and books lying everywhere, and nobody knows what they contain or what to find in the different books or where the data is actually stored physically. So it's really, really an important point. It is a much more, political discussion, because where is the responsibility? Is it with the rich countries to help the countries who maybe don't have as much money for digitalization, or should there be, a more general worldwide data storage platform? Until now, because there is, at least in my opinion, because every country has such a different approach to what kind of data they want to make publicly available and what kind of data they want to keep secret, it makes it really difficult to have, a uniform approach to data sharing or a single platform for this. So yeah, I mean, a very good question again, not one that I can offer a definitive answer to.
I think I can shed some more light on
I
it.
could also add only to how we're trying to get you online here. I think you're trying to say something, Espen.
Yes. You don't hear me?
Is it? Ah, yeah. Here. So try now.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah, but I think this it's a very relevant question, and it's something which I've heard discussed many places around the world, and I can answer on two levels. I know that the European GeoSurveys, so the collaboration between the European geological surveys, is actually working on standardizing these data storage platforms. I don't know how far it is, and I don't know how far they want to take it, but they are making exchange platforms of data. When you go outside the EU, I don't think it will ever be the legislation from country to country is simply too different. I know from experience from working in India, just to take that as an example, that when they fly SkyTeam in India, they're not even allowed to take the data off the helicopter without that there is a military person at the location. So there you are not going to get in with some open source European standards. It's never going to happen. And then for the geophysical data, Gerda could have been, or Gerda was a possibility for storing geophysical data, and it has access it has storage for EM, from all electric and electromagnetic data. But I think that the problem with Gerda is that it's a too complicated a format for many users around the world. I also know that USGS is working on making a geophysical storage format, because I just signed up for being in the working group around a new international format where they will make it an open source. But it's a format. It's not a storage site. But that could be some hopes that there would be something which could be used internationally. Thanks.
Thank you. Could you say something about how STU are storing your data? Are you using the same approach as Denmark with Gerda, or do you have your own solution?
I don't think I should try to say something about that even. I know that we have different databases, but no, I'm not sure to say anything.
Okay, thank you. So you have another question?
How do you decide that the groundwater models are not good enough and that you need to update them? What factors and parameters do you consider in deciding that? Who feels up for the question? Fredrike?
I mean, I guess we're working the most with groundwater models, at least. So I understand that the question is referring to at the startup phase, when we have these notifications by the municipalities that they are changing something in their abstraction structure, how we decide whether or not the old model is good enough. Something that you should know about the history of the Danish groundwater modeling is that initially it was a very short period that was allocated to map the entirety of Denmark. So there were periods where the geological models were very detailed and very meticulously created. And then there were periods where we rushed through a lot of Denmark and maybe didn't give each area as much attention as it deserved. At the same time, there was a lot of development of the methods, both for data collection in terms of geophysics and also the methods of inversion. So the inversion code has also changed through the years, so that now at the end of all of this, we have a much better way of actually, both collecting but also interpreting the data that we have for geological and hydrological models. So one of the ways that we look at it is, when was the data collected? Does the data match with the quality that we expect today? And how much data did we have? Is there, for example, when the model was originally created, you might have had a well in this area over here, and that's where you collected the data. But now the municipality is looking at abstracting water over here, and you have no data over there. So that's one of the places where we might say, we need to update the model because we need to collect some new data over here first before we can actually say anything in particular. And depending on the amount of data that we determine is missing or required, that's where we might decide either to just tweak the groundwater model, the existing model, a little bit with a slightly added new data, or we might say, this is actually a mess and we don't agree with the quality of this at all because we've learned something new about the region. We've determined that there are other geological structures, for example, that weren't included in the original geological model, and we want to redo the entire thing. And that's how we prioritize, both how much of it needs to be updated and also in which order we do the updates for different regions of Denmark.
I can just say that compared to Denmark, if we compare our the areas where we have SkyTem data and our 3D models, we have made very little compared to Denmark with the data, and our approach was to get the data as the survey, and then consultant companies and municipalities and the universities could work with the data, and that will take much more time and many years. So, but we have a lot of data that can be used and can be further implemented into several both groundwater models and geological models.
Yeah, as I understand, one reason for not pushing ahead with doing all that could be done with that data is actually that your resources are allocated to other projects and in other areas.
Thank you. A bit of a wider question. How can we better engage and educate the public about the significance of groundwater and the need for its protection? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I guess you again have been working on this a lot in Denmark. I believe this is a really important question, and from my personal experience, I see when you talk to people who are not trained in groundwater, the groundwater field, many people have very vague or hardly any comprehension of how it actually works. But you've been working on this. You mentioned that in your talk.
Yeah, so not me personally, I haven't been working on this, but since it's been a project and a focus in Denmark for 30 odd years now, it's something that we have a lot of history with. And from the very, from the basis of it, it's about creating ownership in the population of a groundwater resource. That's why I also mentioned in my presentation that, we're proud in Denmark of our water, of our drinking water. We know where it comes from and we want to protect it. And that's not something that happened overnight. That's something that happened, over decades and generations of making people aware that it comes from the ground and we have to protect it because it's so simple that we just do a simple filtration and then we can drink it and we can use it for all the activities that we want. And like I also mentioned, we have this growing population, and yet we have a relatively steady use in groundwater for many years, falling, now steady, despite a growing population. And this is something that comes with educational campaigns that the water that you use is important, and you shouldn't just be using water for everything and so much water all the time. And also, as I mentioned it to some people over lunch, that we pay quite a lot for our groundwater in Denmark, and that also creates a sense of ownership that you pay for this resource that you're actually using. So nobody wants to pay more than they have to for a supply like that. So I think this educational component and creating awareness in the public, it has a lot of different ways that you can implement it, and I think you need to approach it from several different directions for it to actually work. Not only creating the public ownership, but also creating the public responsibility that they can actually do something to support the groundwater protection.
Yeah, I think this is an extremely important question also if you look globally, as some of the examples of the groundwater situation that I showed in my introduction shows that there's massive overuse of groundwater in many parts of the world. And of course, this probably largely boils down to a lack of understanding and responsibility of the groundwater. When the groundwater is over exploited, groundwater levels go down. So then you have to drill a deeper well to get water, and then you take out more water, and then your neighbor has to drill a deeper well, etc., etc. And at the end, you have exhausted the resource. And it's very clear from the examples in India, United States. We've also seen it very clearly in Bolivia, for example, that they're steadily declining groundwater levels, and it's a massive problem that will end with disaster in many cases, I would say. So this educational issue is extremely crucial.
Yeah, information campaigns from the municipalities, I think, is the best ideas or from a Swedish perspective. I know that in several municipalities they have reached out and got the people to work with them to decrease during the drought periods and not to use in like swimming pools and stuff like that. So, that's really good with information campaigns to get the knowledge out there.
Maybe I can add from the research points that we also need to make our research, I think, more visible and getting this more into the society. And I mean, also all the foundations, I mean, they ask for it. And so when we write a proposal for research grant, I mean, this is one of the basic things we need to add, how to disseminate. And yeah, I think that can also create awareness.
And I could add to this that we as researchers also need to communicate to the research funding agencies the importance of this, because we've seen here in Sweden that in the public calls from Formas, for example, the research funding agency, very, very small resources have been allocated to groundwater research. So I think we would need them to realize the importance of this and maybe come with some targeted calls for groundwater related research.
Thank you. We have a question that is directed to you, Fredrike, but the rest of you are, of course, welcome to answer. What kind of filtration do you talk about in Denmark? Do you talk about the importance of minerals, for example, calcium and magnesium for water, for the human and animal health? You have good levels. Do you know that, and is it discussed?
At least from my side, when we talk about filtration, it's a simple sand filtration that we do to the groundwater. So that's why I say no chemical treatment. We don't really do anything to change the levels of minerals in the water. It varies depending on where you are. In some areas of Denmark, you have we call it hard water with a lot of chalk in it. And in other regions, you have soft water with not so much chalk in it. But it's not something that we aim to standardize or aim to change across the country. What I do know happens for areas or water abstraction companies where they see a problem with too much of a certain substance, since they're not allowed to chemically treat the water, what they might do is mix the water. So if they have two different water abstraction wells and one of them has too much of a certain substance and the other one has, not too much of that certain substance, they might mix the two so that the total product is under the limit set politically. But other than that, I don't know of any, focus on the mineral content of the water.
Thank you. I would like to open up again to the audience here. Do you have any other questions, or if you have comments to what we've discussed here before?
I have a question to Peter, maybe. He mentioned about this information, campaigns kind of. So do we have like a citizen science campaign for, making people and gathering the maybe just groundwater levels for their wells, something like that in Sweden? So is there any idea, or it had happened before related to the citizen science? That is what I wanted to ask. Science.
About the groundwater levels, and I think that I'm not really sure if this is the correct answer, but I think that the thing we have done now with the groundwater levels began in the decades ago on a low level, And when we had this drought, we got much more money. We could make this on a totally better scale. And we've gone from once a month, once a week, and now we can do some of the areas we can do even more often. And we look both backwards and forward or in the future. And I think that before this drought, couldn't imagine that someone even could sit in the morning sofa, TV sofa, and talk about groundwater in Sweden. But actually, we have done that, and these groundwater level maps and investigations has really changed, I think, or has gone through to the people in Sweden, and it's the most downloaded data on our website, the groundwater levels. I think that's. I'm not really sure if that was exactly what you need to know, but.
So the SkyTem data is not as hot among the public.
We have time for one more short question before we wrap up.
Hello, this is a question for Tina. I just was curious about these values of permeability coming from this resistivity and chargeability. I was thinking that it could be a good approach in those places where it's tricky to perform a drilling, a pumping test, for example, and to get this. Okay. I was thinking if this approach could be good in those places that it's tricky to carry out a pumping test to know some hydraulic properties, for example. And I was wondering, or my question is, how can I get these values from this resistivity and chargeability?
I think this method is valuable everywhere where you want to know about the underground. Of course, the places where you do the pumping test, but or not but and the values. I mean, I have used Arhus in for that, but there are also other software, or where you can just actually invert for it or calculate for it. But there is still a lot of research ongoing around this. So it's not final result yet. It's just one, let's say, one step. But you can use it already. I can show you.
You could point out that if you want to use your DCIP, direct resistivity and induced polarization data for these kind of calculations, it's very, very important how you acquire your data, your measurement settings, and that you're very, very meticulous and careful about data quality when you acquire the data. So we can have a look at that together, of course.
Yes, I think that's all the questions that we have time for right now, and we'll take your questions after the seminar. We'll just wrap up first, and then we can talk for a while. Yeah.
Yeah. I think to show this map on to the online people would be really difficult.
Yep. Thank you so much, our speakers of today. It's been so interesting to listen, and thank you so much, the audience, for asking your questions. I'll just leave over to Thorleif to wrap it up.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for coming here and giving your presentations, and thank you very much, Espen, for giving your presentation. It's a pity you couldn't join us here. It's difficult to take a beer together online, but have to do that another time then. And thank you to the audience and Malin and Sivi for helping to organize this. And let's give them a hand here for. And